Table 242 is a podcast connected to Grace Fellowship Saratoga that dives deeper than Sunday morning, exploring how faith shapes the other 6 days of the week. Rooted in Acts 2:42, we're devoted to God's Word, real-life conversations, and the power of community, prayer, and spiritual growth. Join us as we reflect on how God is at work in our everyday lives. So pull up a chair, no reservations needed. Hey, thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to the Table 242 podcast. We are Pastor Isaac and Abigail, and today we are going to unpack a little bit of the end of Acts 2.
Yeah.
So if you missed episode 1, we unpacked chapter 1 and then verse 42 a little bit. So if you haven't heard that.
Unpacked might be a little strong.
I said a little bit. A little bit.
Yeah.
So we took a few things out of the suitcase.
It's like that's okay. The fun side thing. That would be a fun thing for people to even comment somewhere of like, when you go to a hotel, are you unpack the suitcase and put it in the drawers? Maybe that's just a funny
drawers cannot be clean.
See, we are typically not. We live out of the suitcase the whole time we're at the hotel, whether that's 1 night, 2 nights, whatever. That's just how we do it.
That's true. But I guess we're not usually there more than
when I traveled with the baseball team in college, there were guys.
What?
Yeah, there were guys. We'd be on this spring break trip going from hotel to hotel, and even for only 1 night there were guys who would unpack and put their stuff in the drawer. And one guy in particular I remember saying, because he wanted it to feel a little bit like home or a little bit like normal, so that he could just even, because we would get up and leave the next day, so he wanted the feeling in the next morning. Open up the drawer, pull out what you needed rather than taking it out of the suitcase.
That is wild.
So however that transitions that doesn't transfer at all to unpacking scripture or like I said, maybe we just pulled it out of the suitcase a little bit. There's still so much in there that we didn't talk about, but we did give the Cliff's Notes version.
An overview
of chapter 1.
So should I start over and say?
No. That was just a funny thing.
We did a very brief and minimal.
Like, oh man, I'm going back to episode 1 so that I can get the
true. We don't want to oversell ourselves.
We get the full breakdown of chapter 1. That's not what we did.
All right, that's fair.
But today we are.
So we stopped at verse 42.
Yeah.
And so we're going to pick back up.
Yep.
And we're going to scratch the surface, if you will. The rest of chapter 2.
Commentary here.
No,
we're not,
this is not a word by word study.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to read. How many? Should I read the whole thing?
Sure.
Okay, starting in Acts chapter 2, verse 43. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved.
All right. So today we want to look at, and again, scratch the surface.
Yes.
Talk about these verses a little bit as it connects to this, our title of Table 242, this whole idea of devoting themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. Mm-hmm. That verse 43 is connecting to what has happened with Pentecost and everything. Mm-hmm. Everyone was filled with awe. Many wonders and signs were performed. And then we get to verse 44, and that's, I think as we go 44 and beyond is what we're really, is one of the things we want this podcast to truly be about, is this connecting the teachings, the experience that we have together on Sunday morning to normal life, and these aspects together, having everything in common, and just talk about what that looks like a little bit, because there is a cultural aspect to this, that what the church looked like in the early time of Acts. And you and I talked about that a little bit, and you want to go with some of your thoughts?
Because we mentioned in the last podcast that in 2018 Isaac and I got to go to Israel. And one of the things that I was shocked, and I had no idea, was that family units lived communally, not like we do in modern day the United States, where everyone has their own house. It was a matriarch and a patriarch, and then all their sons, and then the wives and the grandchildren. And it was one home. It was one building, and every time a sibling got married, they would add a room to it. So there was one kitchen. There was obviously no bathrooms because it was a long time ago. There was like a courtyard or some sort of entrance kind of thing, but it kind of put in perspective a lot of Bible stories that I had heard that I had always kind of put into an American home, modern American home, but then to literally go and see the ruins, it was so fascinating. And I had no idea that I just had no idea culturally anything about the Bible. But this idea of them having everything in common, it makes sense because it wouldn't have been so far outside of their normal culture. Where if we were today to say, you need to live communally, that would be shocking because it's so far from our cultural norm.
Right.
That we all have our own space and we have our own homes and we have even our own rooms within our homes.
Yeah.
But it would have been a lot more communal. They were already living in community.
Yeah.
Now they're just living in Christian community.
Right.
If that.
Yeah.
So all the believers were together and had everything in common. They already did have everything in common, but now they just have like, I don't know, I kind of feel, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like they had bloodlines in common. Now they have faith in common.
Yeah.
And that is something that does translate culturally.
Yeah.
Because I don't need to have anything in common with you, but if we have the same faith.
Yeah. And then I think that's part of it. And then it goes, in the verses that follow, that really gets into practical senses then, because it says they had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. And that's where the faith piece comes in, where the commonality comes in, because to your point, people in that culture would have naturally cared for family members.
Yeah.
But now there was this connecting faith that brought them together to be willing to sell or share possessions in order to help those who were in need, so that it's not
outside of their family.
Correct. Yeah. Because before, like you're saying, before that point, it would have very much been the community aspect was with family. And even if you go back to the Old Testament, it was care for your family, care for the people in your group, your tribe, that was just the way things worked, the way things were. But now there's this new day, new era. Yeah. But it does get trickier then to translate in our Western United States world now in 2025 as we record this, because we're an example of this. We don't live by any of our closest sibling is a couple hours away. Yeah. And our parents are states away. Our grandparents are states away. And aunts, uncles, everyone is all over the place. You in particular have one of your siblings is on the West Coast. So it's like many families are spread thousands of miles apart. So the communal aspect does translate maybe differently, in this degree as it connects to faith. And I think that's a beautiful thing as we talk about the faith aspect, bringing people together in the church world, that we get to care for people, minister to people who aren't a part of our original family of origin. Yeah.
When we think too about when it says they sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need, it's an interesting concept to think about radical generosity because, this is the beginning of the church. Yeah. And the things that we know about the church are that they spent time together and they were generous. Those are the two things. And I think it's interesting because we have strayed from that. And the church is not necessarily known for being a place to find community and for being a place to find generosity or to be generous. And when I say the church, I mean the church at large, because I do think that Grace Fellowship Saratoga does have a reputation for being a place to find community and also a place of generosity. Yeah. But I think that if we're taking this and thinking about it, what does it look like in our own lives outside of Sundays? Yeah. How do I live in community and together with people? And how do I create a life of generosity? Yeah. Both materially, but also with other things. And I think it's interesting to point out that they sold things. Yeah. Which means they weren't just taking their savings and giving it, or their extra every month and giving it. They were actually sacrificing. They were taking something and saying, I don't need this anymore, or I'm going to donate this basically and sell it so that I can be more generous. Yeah. And I don't know that that's a mindset that I necessarily have often of how can I be radically generous every day, even at the cost of
comfortable
a cost. I should have said even at a cost.
At a cost, yeah. And we all, I think, get comfortable with what we own, with what we have, and the idea of I'll sell this, part with this, in order to care for someone else. Like, let's be honest, how often I often give the offering talks at church, things like that, and we'll talk about generosity. And to your point, we do want to be a church who is generous, but I don't think I've ever said or even given the idea of, hey, when's the last time you thought about selling something and giving the money to someone in need? It's just not a common thing anymore. We think about, I'll sell something in order to buy something else.
Yeah, to
replace something, or I'll sell something in order to have the funds or profit off of something that I'm done with, and then better my life in some other way, or use the money to enjoy something for myself. Yeah. And it's just not a common practice for us to go, what could I sell that then those funds could be used for kingdom work?
I think for another layer maybe of this conversation is that they were following the prompting of God. They weren't just being like willy-nilly about it or random. Yeah. That, we learned in verse 42 that they were devoted to the teaching and they were devoted to community and to prayer, and that would lead to clearly hearing from God when God is asking us to do something. And I think sometimes we have these moments of generosity rather than having a life of generosity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, or even what I was saying with selling things and thinking about that, to go, have I prayed about this? Yeah. And
do I feel like God is asking me to? Yeah. I don't think we would advocate for someone saying, okay, now I need to get rid of my cars because I need to be radically generous. Right. I think if God is asking you to get rid of your cars, sure. But I just think that we also need to be careful not to go to an extreme of earning our faith by doing things because we think that we're going to earn something. Yeah. I think that sometimes when I read Acts, particularly the beginning, it feels so extreme and it feels so out of reach. I read these verses and I'm like, well, I could never live communally. So I'm just going to skip over all of this and then go to the next part, because it's just not even, a sliver of a possibility. And I think that what I would want to encourage us is that we're kind of like shooting for the moon, but we're taking like little baby steps. I don't think God would want us to all of us at church to sell our houses and buy an apartment complex and live in an apartment complex and be communal living. Maybe you're wrong. Maybe God would want us to do that. But I think that God honors us giving him what we have to work with. And when we're talking about living in a very busy season of life, you know, we have young kids.
Yeah.
We're busy with work and things, that it's not an all or nothing. It can be a little bit. It can be, what do I have to offer? I can be open to God asking me to do something and then open to obeying. Yeah. If that makes sense. I don't feel like I'm clearly saying what I am thinking.
Well, if this helps, or I think I'm hearing you say it's asking and answering this question, what does this look like and what does obedience look like in this season, in this time? Because it's not going to always look the same. And like you were saying, in our season with raising young kids, it's going to look different than the family who is, their kids are grown out of the house, you know, adult children, or the single person, or the newly married person, or the grandparents. Every season is going to look a little bit different. So what does this practicing this in your season, and also what we were talked about this a little bit in the first episode, in 2025 in our current society? Because I think there's an aspect of this also that's about hospitality, that it's not, there was communal living, like you're saying, that almost just happened naturally because there was a close proximity. But I think in our current, again, era of life and world we live in, everybody, like you're saying, has their homes. Some, not as many, live in apartments, or at least where we are, as we're talking about this in Saratoga, there's people, you know, especially that are coming to Grace Saratoga, who might live on a 10-acre farm, you know, while someone else is living here in Saratoga or in another local community. So the question might be then, what does it look like to open up your home? What does it look like to welcome people in? What does it look like to spend time together at a park, or go out to a restaurant together? What do these meeting points look like in order to care for each other? I mentioned the word hospitality, which usually invokes inviting people in or having people over, but there's also this coming together, or, you know, and as you go down into verse 46, it does say they broke bread in their homes and they ate together with glad and sincere hearts. And so it's sharing meals together. And we talked about that in the first episode with this breaking of bread, that there's this aspect of coming together, sharing a meal together, that then brings out this level of community, this level of vulnerability, this level of just being able to share and have life together. And that's both with people from the church, and then also it could be a neighbor, it could be the friends. But I think a lot of what we're talking about here with the early church is with those who share faith values. I think that's a big piece of this, is coming together to talk about what God's up to in your life.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's a lot of like all-inclusive language where it says all the believers had everything in common every day. They broke bread with all the people. And I think that we need to remember too that we're talking about unity, but we're also talking about layers of relationships, because it doesn't say that they met in a home. It said their homes, plural. So we're having community with all the people. We have a sense of unity, but we're having different levels of relationships with different people, which Jesus modeled. Because he spent time with the multitudes. He would change his plans. He would feed the thousands, but then he would explain his parables to smaller groups. And then he had his 12 disciples. And then he even had 3 out of the 12 that were even closer.
Really close.
So we see Jesus, like, I don't want, because my thought with this at one point while we were talking about it was, oh, great, now I need to have everybody in the church into my home. I need to be best friends with all the people. And I think that's not true, but I can have unity with people at church.
Yeah.
Even people that I disagree with on a lot of levels, because we still have common faith.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, we can still have a unity and a relationship.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that I need to be best friends. And
Right.
we invite people into our home that we wouldn't invite other people into our home because we're closer with some
Right.
people than we are with others,
Yeah.
which we're having community deeper with some people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you think about it relationally, we shouldn't be sharing all the things with all the people,
Right.
like about me.
Sure.
I shouldn't be vulnerable
with everyone.
with everybody,
Yeah.
but there should be some people that
Right.
I can be vulnerable with, and I can let in a little bit deeper.
Yeah. And I think there's an aspect of this, and that we kind of ended the first section with verse 41. 3,000 were added that day. This big gathering of people, all tons of people being added to the number. You get to the end of this section, it says, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. That verse there's probably a whole sermon in itself on that, but I want to just talk about what you were just saying, made me think of that verse in the reality that it wasn't like in verse 41, they were going, 3,000 people got added and those 3,000 people all went to someone's house.
Yeah. For the after party.
There's an after, no, it's those 3,000 people went somewhere to a bunch of different homes.
Yeah.
Similarly, added to their number daily those who are being saved. Well, if those people are going to truly come into the community, there's a bunch of everybody's got to be, these homes were only so large. You can only have so many people. So there's a community aspect that is built in, that you're going to get together in homes, other places to truly do life together. We talked about this a little bit in the first episode, that we'd love to hang out with everybody that's listening to the podcast, but this is a way that we do get to hang out, I guess you might say, in this realm. But we encourage people to have those relationships. We talked about the membership covenant of grace, of having life-giving relationships. And so these are relationships, these are spaces where you're able to, we use the phrase life-giving because it's a mutual edification. Yeah. Edification is a churchy word. Ooh.
You said another word that I was like, bleh. Oh, doing life together.
Doing life together. Edification means just being
growing together.
Growing together. But it means edifying, which is just sharing kind words to encourage and support.
Is that like the definition
of edifying?
It's funny, if you had said, could you define edifying, I would not be able to. Like, I don't know. I could give you I know enough church lingo that I could give you something, but
so
I guess to wrap it up, I feel like we kind of jumped all over the place, and there's a lot of different things. And I think what I would encourage you to do is, rather than just letting us tickle your ears, to use another church phrase, of like just having these fancy things and thinking, oh yeah, that sounds great, but actually asking God what he wanted you to hear, what he is kind of pricking your heart to maybe take a step. Oh gosh,
we are nailing it with these church words.
I know.
Today.
I'm so sorry. My takeaway is going to be to not use so many church lingos.
How's God prompting you?
Yeah. Just one thing. What would be one thing that could be a takeaway for you that you could do in these next few days?
Yeah. Awesome.
And then let us know.
Yeah.
Because we do actually want to know.
We do want to know. We're here together to continue to grow and learn and be at the table, growing together and helping.
So if we do have listeners, this is how we're going to know whether or not we have anybody listening, is if you tell us.
That's right.
That you were listening. And tell us what your one thing is.
That's true. Yeah. And we appreciate those who are jumping in, and we would love, that feedback, that support, and whether that's...
Unless your feedback is to use less church lingo.
Hey,
I'm working on it.
We will...
I will do my best.
Maybe people love it.
Then it's the wrong people.
Oh, all right. Well, I had said this last time. Any final words, or you just want to be
still didn't think about...
We're out. We want to just...
I've always wanted a closing phrase that we could say, like, over and out. Like, mic drop. Just done. Over. Close.
Well, this is only the beginning. So we'll come up with one. And from there...
Actually, this is the end.
The beginning of our podcast.
I know. I'm
pieces. So we...
Until next time.
Okay, maybe that's the phrase. Like, this is the end.